talking about the annotations that you wanted to talk about the annotations. What are you struggling with regards to the annotations?
How exactly do we have to do it? If we go into what is that thing's name? The thing is we do it on.
Yeah, the Rap Genius program.
Yeah, the Rap Genius program. If you go on there, then how we're supposed to do it? That is what I'm struggling with that.
Okay, so on every week that I asked you to do a biblical annotation, I sent you the link, right, to the annotation that I want you to do. So if you go into your lesson plan, it'll say prep work for week 2, prep work for week 3. If I haven't given you prep work, so I didn't give it to you this past week or the week before, then it meant that you didn't have to do it. So that link should take you straight into the passage that I want you to annotate, and then you just highlight. For me, the annotations are about wanting to get you back into the text. So it's not supposed to be an onerous part of your week, right? I want to see that you're reading the text, that you're thinking about what the text is saying, right? It's not a assignment where I expect you to have done any kind of research or to go and look up in commentaries or anything like that. I just want to see how you are engaging with the text that you read. And so as you read through the text, things that catch your eye, things that you notice, just highlight those, and then highlight, and then you put an annotation key. I'm not actually sure what the exact process is, but I think you highlight, and then a choice comes up, and you hit annotate, and then a comment, and then you can write your comment in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just, while you're busy now, I'm just going to try and go into that links that you said that I see. Do I come up at that place? Because I was struggling to come up into that direction, yes. Okay? So while you are busy, I will just go in here and then I will see you can get access to it.
Okay, yeah. And what it does, yeah, because as far as I'm aware, follow that link, you should get there.
And the link is where?
So if you go to the left,
it's the link at lessons.
Yeah, the links are always in the list.
I showed you where the key is.
Sorry?
Now I'm just struggling to get into full.
I'll also look later today if I can follow the link through, and if it doesn't, then I'll look, but and to see if there's another way you can get in. But as far as I'm aware, you should just be able to click on the link, and it should take you directly to the Rap Genius site.
Okay.
And the actual annotation that you need to create. You still there?
Yes.
Okay.
You can continue. You can continue with your lesson today.
Sorry?
I say you can continue now because I'm for letting the time.
All right. So what I was wanting us to do today is this week we get to the book of Numbers. And so I want us to look at Numbers today in our chat, and then you'll do Deuteronomy kind of through the week. When we get to the beginning of Numbers, we're still in what is referred to as the Sinai tradition. Right? So Israel is still encamped at Sinai, right? So this is part of the tradition that's gone from the middle of Exodus all the way through Leviticus, and now it's coming out in Numbers 10:10. All the way through, sorry, to Numbers 10. That was kind of the Sinai tradition, right? So that was when Israel was receiving was entering into covenant with Yahweh and receiving some of the laws and commandments around that relationship, took them all the way up to Numbers 10:10. As we come into Numbers 11, we see Israel is moving again. Right? Israel is moving towards the promised land. And so for the rest of Numbers, we're going to see them gradually and incrementally getting closer and closer to the promised land. In Deuteronomy, we see them encamped on the banks of the Jordan River, kind of preparing themselves to enter into the promised land. But when we get to Numbers 11, we get a very interesting story that happens. And so what we find in these moments where Israel is traveling are relational transactions between Yahweh and Israel. Moments where Yahweh and Israel are trying to figure out for themselves what it means to be in covenant. What are God's expectations for Israel and Israel's expectations for God? They're getting to know each other. And in Numbers 11, we find a very interesting story. And so I just want to read that for you quickly, and then we're going to kind of talk through that. So the version that I'm reading from is from the Jewish Publication Society, just so you know what translation I'm using in my reading. So just listen quickly, and then we can kind of talk through together what we hear in this particular story. So it says, the people took to complaining bitterly before the Lord. The Lord heard and was incensed. A fire of the Lord broke out against them, ravaging the outskirts of the camp. The people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. The place was named Taberah because a fire of the Lord had broken out against them. The riffraff in their midst felt a gluttonous craving, and then the Israelites wept and said, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish that we used to eat free in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. Now our gullets are shriveled. There is nothing at all, nothing but this manna to look at. Now the manna was like coriander seed, and in color it was like, well, bdellium. The people would go about and gather it, grind it between millstones, or pound it into a mortar, boil it in a pot, and make it into cakes. It tasted like rich cream. When the dew fell on the camp at night, the manna would fall upon it. Moses heard the people weeping, every clan apart, each person at the entrance of his tent. The Lord was very angry, and Moses was distressed. And Moses said to the Lord, why have you dealt ill with your servant, and why have I not enjoyed your favor, that you have laid the burden of all this people upon me? Did I conceive all this people? Did I bear them, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries an infant, to the land that you have promised on oath to their fathers? Where am I to get meat to give all this people, when they whine before me and say, give us meat to eat? I cannot carry all this people by myself, for it is too much for me. If you would deal thus with me, kill me rather, I beg you, and let me see no more of my wretchedness. Then the Lord said to Moses, gather for me the 70 of Israel's elders, of whom you have experience as elders and officers of the people, and bring them to the tent of the meeting, and let them take their place there before you. And I will come down and speak with you there, and will draw upon the Spirit that is on you, and put it upon them. They shall bear the burden of the people with you, and you shall not bear it alone. And say to the people, purify yourselves for tomorrow, and you shall eat meat, for you have kept whining before the Lord and saying, if only we had meat to eat, indeed we were better off in Egypt. The Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. You shall eat not 1 day, not 2, not even 5 days, or 10 or 20, but a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you. For you have rejected the Lord who is among you by whining before him and saying, oh, why did we ever leave Egypt? But Moses said, the people who are with me number 600,000 men. Yet you say, I will give enough meat to eat for a whole month? Could enough flocks and herds be slaughtered to suffice them? Or could all the fish of the sea be gathered for them to suffice them? And the Lord answered Moses, is there a limit to the Lord's power? You shall see soon whether what I have said happens to you or not. So Moses went out and reported the words of the Lord to the people. He gathered 70 of the people's elders and stationed them around the tent. Then the Lord came down in a cloud and spoke to him. He drew upon the Spirit that was on him and put it upon the 70 elders. And when the Spirit rested upon them, they spoke in ecstasy, but did not continue. 2 men, one named Eldad and the other Medad, had remained in camp, yet the Spirit rested upon them. They were among those recorded, but they had not gone out to the tent, and they spoke in ecstasy in the camp. A youth ran out and told Moses, saying, Eldad and Medad are acting the prophet in the camp. And Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' attendant from his youth, spoke up and said, My lord Moses, restrain them. But Moses said to him, Are you wrought up on my account? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, that the Lord put his Spirit upon them. Moses then re-entered the camp together with the elders of Israel. A wind from the Lord started up, swept quail from the sea, and strewed them over the camp, about a day's journey on this side and about a day's journey on that side, all around the camp, and some 2 cubits deep on the ground. 2 cubits is about, commentators say it's about up to their armpits, right? So quite a dense amount. The people set to gather and quail all that day and night and all the next day. Even he who gathered least had 10 homers, and they spread them out all around the camp. The meat was still between their teeth, not yet chewed, when the anger of the Lord blazed forth against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very severe plague. The place was named Kibroth Hattaavah, because the people who had the craving were buried there. Not a story that we often read, right? And at first glance, you kind of try and figure out what on earth is going on here, right? I don't know about you, but the first time I read it, I was like, so God gives them the meat that they're craving and then strikes them down with plague. Right? Anyone who took meat, he struck down. But what did you notice in this chapter? Eden, you're the only ones there, so I'm talking to you. What did you notice in amongst all of this? What stood out for you?
Well, the people was ungrateful and they longed back to Egypt. And yeah.
I think that's one of the key features of this, right? So carry on.
Yeah, so they forget easily how they suffered in Egypt now, and they don't trust God enough to know that He will bring them to a place what He has promised in the covenant for them.
Yeah. And I think that that goes even further when we understand that kind of manna, right? So God's feeding them every day, right, with manna, and we read that it tasted like rich cream, like this was good food.
Yes.
And manna is a symbol or is a metaphor for sufficiency. So it wasn't like they were starving, it wasn't like they were hungry. Like God was feeding them, God was providing for them, and providing for them well, right? I mean, all of us, I think, would like to eat rich cream every day, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't even planned, and yet they still long for Egypt, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's still long back to, I always laugh, they're like, oh, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the garlic. I was like, of all the things you could have wished for, really, cucumbers? Right, but anyway. And so they look back to their time of slavery, right? And think that was better than what God was providing for them now. What they had in Egypt, even under bondage and oppression, was somehow better than this freedom that God had entered into them, that they had entered into with God, even when that was more than they needed. And so it's not just about, oh, they were hungry and wanted food. God was providing for them and they weren't satisfied. Did you notice anything else in the chapter? Anything else that stood out for you in the chapter?
Just that piece also that where the Lord said that, okay, then I will provide for you meat, and you will have so much that it will come through your nostrils.
Sorry, say that again. I didn't catch it.
I said that the Lord become angry with them, and
Yeah.
so he will provide for them meat, but they will have so much that it will come through their nostrils.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So God says, well, I'll give you what you want, but this is not actually what you need. And so part of his anger in meeting that is that he says they'll come out of your nostrils, and then right at the end, in fact, anyone who ate the meat got struck down. Right?
Yeah.
Says meat was still between their teeth, not yet chewed, when the anger of the Lord blazed forth. And the Lord struck the people with a very severe plague. So Ellen Davis, who you met in you might have met if you've done the second assignment, she's one of my favorite theologians, and she gives us a suggestion of how we can, how we can begin trying to understand this passage and what God was kind of doing in this passage. And if I can find my screen share. Why is my screen share not coming up? Oh, I'm pressing the wrong thing. Sorry.
Okay, what you want?
Can you see that now?
Yes.
Okay. So she says for her the key to trying to understand this story is in fact the double answer that God has given to the Israelites kind of complaining and gluttonous and craving. So first there's the angry answer, which we talked about. Sorry, I just need to turn you off for a moment and I'll turn you back on. All right. So first is the angry answer, in which God provides meat, but also sends the plague that comes with that. Right? But alongside that, kind of in the midst of it, which seems a little bit odd, we see this outpouring of prophecy as well. And so we see Moses getting taken, or God telling Moses to take the elders of Israel into the tent of meeting, and we see the Spirit of God coming down on the elders. And so she's saying is perhaps what we can take away from the story, we're going to come back to this outpouring of prophecy, is the idea of voluntary simplicity. Right? Which is when voluntary simplicity is when we treat our material desires in the context of the needs of those who will come after us. So practicing the art of voluntary simplicity is asking not so much what do I need or what do I want. And when I say need, I mean desires, not, obviously we all have needs that need to be met, right? We all need to have food and clothing and shelter. But those who are being met for Israel already by God, this was their desires beyond that, right? They already had sufficient. We see that in the manna. God had already provided for them. But what we now see is that their desires was for more than they needed. And perhaps not thinking about the people that would come after them. They would rather go back to Egypt. They would rather go back to bondage because there they could get the kind of food that they wanted, right? Not thinking about what that might mean for future generations. And our motivation for voluntary simplicity is a hunger for justice. Now, this idea of justice came up in Leviticus, right? That God's people are called to be holy, and that call to holiness is in part an ethical imperative, right? That we're called to think about in our holiness. Part of that is how do we interact in community? How do we engage with the people who are in community with us? And that has a strong tilt, certainly in Leviticus, towards justice. And so here again, after Leviticus and after this understanding of who they're called to be, and they're called to be a just and a community that is focused on the other and not merely on themselves, we get to Numbers and we can already see that their focus has shifted back to themselves. And so again, this idea of voluntary simplicity, a hunger for justice, with the understanding that when one person has too much, others have not enough, right? Perfect. And so, although the biblical story, although the kind of story we get here is disturbing, right? I mean, we don't like to think of God giving food and then sending the plague. it also has an element of hope, and that hope comes about in the second answer, right? In the outpouring of prophecy. And so the question we need to ask is, what is the connection between Israel's greed and this our overflow of prophecy? And Ellen Davis suggests to us that the basic function of all the prophets is to give Israel kind of a God's eye view of the situation, right? And we're going to see this more and more as we can start entering into the former prophets and then even next term into the latter prophets. This idea is that the prophets were there to help the people see that what they were doing is hostile to God, and in what way what they were doing was hostile to God, and then to call them back to a life lived in dignity and beauty before God. And so we see in the story God's anger blazing against Israel, right? We see him going, I have given you sufficient, I have given you more, and yet you still want more and more and more. You're not satisfied with sufficient, right? You're not satisfied with all the good things I give you. You keep wanting more and more, even if those things are in fact bad for you, right? Like Egypt was for them, right? And so God's anger does blaze against them, going, how can you not be satisfied? But even in that, he still spends time, or he's still, even within his anger, has the aspect of the prophets, right, who come in and say, this is why what we are doing is hostile to God. And so the prophets there in this answer are there to try and help Israel after the plague, those who have survived, to reorientate them away from craving for meat to gratitude for manna, right? Away from thinking about all the things they don't have to focus in on all the things that they do have, right? All the things that God has provided for them. And so in no uncertain terms, the prophets, as we see here already, begin to challenge Israel to focus on God's faithfulness instead of all the things that they think they want but might not actually be good for them. Eden, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a beautiful illustration of God's grace and his infinite love towards his creation, and how he has got so much patience with us. And even though we from time to time, we as people, we are not doing what he expects from us, and then he comes back again and he gives us again another chance, give us again a second chance, and so on. And
yeah.
I think that is the message right through the Bible, that yes, he is a God of that keeps to his promises, but also he's also not a father that just give in and give in to us, but he will reprimand us and he will show us, but listen, this is what I expect from you. And yeah. In this story, it comes out again very clearly that yes, he has given for them sufficient, but they long for more. But then he sent the prophecy in and to show them where they went wrong and what he actually expects from them.
Yeah. And so what we see starting here, and we're going to see this come up over and over again, like you were saying, is this idea that there are sometimes consequences for our actions, right? And God allows those consequences to happen. But even within his justice coming, there is always the element of relationship that he brings back in. So even in the midst of punishment, or even in the midst of facing the consequences to our action, God always brings hope alongside that, right? He always brings a way back to him, even within that. So in this story, it's really about the hope of the prophets, right? That the prophets are going to help reorientate them. So he doesn't just punish them, right, for what they were doing and just leave it at that. There are consequences, but at the same time, he gives a way for Israel to come back to him, right? To reorientate themselves to him.
That's right.
Yeah. And like I said, like you said, we're going to see this coming up time and time again, particularly in the prophets, right? There is always a remnant. There's always those who will remain, and God finds a way of bringing them back, right, to Him, with Him. The other thing I think that's quite important for us to remember about this story is that it's not about they just wanted more, right? Because they did, but they couldn't trust in what God had given them, right? That they couldn't sit back and go, God has given us is good. They kept looking back to things that were in fact bad for them and thinking, well, that would have been better. And so we're in effect rejecting God, right? Rejecting all that God had done for them, rejecting all that God had given them, and saying, well, this isn't actually what I want, or this isn't actually what I need. I need something more, something different. Right? And so because I don't want us to ever think that we can't not want things, right?
Yeah.
That it's not, because it is important to have dreams and to go out and fulfill them. The question is, do those dreams deny what God has already done for us? And can we express gratitude for the multitude of things that God's already done for us? Yeah. In our last few minutes, I just want us to look through, I think if I remember correctly, my next slide is, let me just check. Yeah. Can you see the slide on me?
No, we can't see the slide.
You can't see the slide? Okay, hold on. Oh, that's the wrong one again. I just want to talk a little bit. There we go. Now you see the slide?
No.
I want us to talk a little bit about your next assignment, because this is your big assignment that's coming up, right? That's due. So it's a narrative study of David, right? So we're looking at the story of David, right?
Yes.
And like I say in your outline, okay, hold on. I'm just going to mute you for a little bit, all right? Just because I can hear the feedback. So for many of us, we've grown up with the stories of the gospel in the Old Testament, right? We feel like we know them. We've been told them and retold them so many times that we feel like we've kind of got the story. And so as a result, we seldom sit down and simply read the actual biblical narratives of those stories. If I asked you now, you could tell me the story of David, right? You could, tell me kind of the highlights of what happens in the story, right? And so we often we skip over them because we're like, oh, I know this. And we don't sit down and really actually read the narrative. And so we miss some of the drama and kind of the power of these stories. That what kind of language was used, the words used by the author, all of these create a web of meaning that is important to kind of try and focus on. And this meaning comes into sharper focus when we kind of start tracing out the links between them. And so in this assignment, I want you to come back again to reading the text, right? We've been doing this kind of slowly and bit by bit in your biblical annotations, but now I want us to really focus on kind of one text and to explore how the author told the story, to identify kind of the characters, and to engage in a really close reading of the text. Sorry, I see that part of that slide is missing. I'm not quite sure if I can. No. And so the text that we're going to use are the two great narratives of the story of David, right? Which is 1 Samuel 16, verse 1, through to 2 Samuel 5:5. And then you can skip a bit and then go from 2 Samuel chapter 9 to chapter 20. Right? So it's 1 Samuel chapter 16 from verse 1 all the way through to 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 5. That's the first kind of story. And then jump to 2 Samuel chapter 9 to chapter 20. Right? Those are that's the story we're going to focus on. And what I want you to do for me is I want you to pitch a movie to me. So pretend I'm, some big hotshot in one of the movie studios, right? And you want to make a movie of the story of David, and you have to pitch the idea to me so that I can decide whether I'm going to back your movie, right? And so I want you to be creative in how you present this, right? You can present it in any kind of way that you want. It doesn't have to be a written assignment. it can be if that's kind of more your thing. But if you want to get a little bit more creative, that's fantastic. Just make sure that your pitch includes all the information that I need, right? And so some of the things you need to include in your pitch would be, what would the title of your movie be, right? How would you succinctly, don't say the story of David, right? What do you think is kind of the core of the story that you can give a title? Would it be a comedy story, an action, a romance, right? What theme are you going with, and kind of what is the story about, and why are you choosing that? Right? What is the main plot, right? What is going to happen throughout the movie, right? And so you need to kind of focus in on the key moments that are happening throughout the story and tell me what those stories are. Don't just give me a summary of the story of David. I know the story of David, right? So I don't want a story. I want to know, can you pick out what are those key definitional moments within the story that you need to understand that an audience would need in order to be able to trace out what's happening in the story, right? And remember that movies can be divided into a number of acts, right? So you could have Act 1, Scene 1, or Act 1, this kind of happens, and then we have a turning point or surprise that changes the story, and then the story moves on to kind of a slightly different kind of tack than you originally thought. What happens to the character of David, right, through this story? How does he develop? Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy, right? What's kind of going on? Who are the main characters? So who are some of the other people? And you can even tell me who will play them, right? What's going to happen in them? And then, like I said, what are some of the crucial scenes needed for your plot and what happens in them? I think I've told you, I've asked for 1,500 words in this. Again, if you're a little bit more creative, I'm not so hassled that you don't necessarily have all those words, but I do want all that information. So Eden, if I put you back online, do you have any questions?
Oh, this is the big one. Oh, by the Christmas.
Hello.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions, Eden?
So you want
to do the second
one. Okay. So maybe we must.
Sorry?
Talk
Are you okay? You understand what I'm asking from you? Eden?
You can explain to me what my the second one.
It's about Abraham.
The second stage of the power. But
Eden?
you said there's a passage.
All right, I'm going to presume that there are no questions from anyone. If you have any, you're most welcome to email me. Do you have any questions about the assignment?
But it is
It's not done. It is unlimited, but it's not.
I said, do you have any questions about the assignment?
Just say whether they can't hear.
All right, I'm not quite sure what's happened on the inside.
Yeah.
So if you have any questions, you're most welcome to email me, right? Like I said, I want you to be as creative as you can be in this assignment, right? Think of a different way that you could present it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a written assignment, but you do need to kind of include all the information that I've asked for in it. All right? Eden seems to have frozen. All right, well, that's going to be all for today. I hope you have fun in the week. In the week, we're going to really look at Deuteronomy. And what I'm going to try to do is, because we've missed so many sessions, I would like us to schedule another TUT for 2 weeks' time. So we've got this week and then another 2 weeks still of material that we need to cover. We need to still get all the way to 2 Kings. So we're going to finish the Pentateuch this week. And then the following week we'll do Joshua through to 2 Kings. And I'll see you next. So we'll have another TUT in 2 weeks' time. That'll be our final week. Hope you guys have a good week. Bye.